Have you ever looked out the window and thought, are we witnessing the end of an era? Maybe you don't even need to look very far. Forests are disappearing, oceans are becoming acidic, and entire species simply cease to exist. It's as if we are experiencing a dark repetition of something that has happened before, but this time with a different protagonist, us. The question that echoes is simple but devastating. Are we causing the sixth mass extinction in Earth's history? Over more than 4.5 billion years, our planet has survived unimaginable catastrophes. From the impact of devastating asteroids to the poisoning of the air by living beings themselves, life on Earth has always seemed to walk on a knife's edge, ready to disappear at any moment. But something incredible always happened. Life found a way. Today, however, we face a different scenario. This time, the cause is not an asteroid or a colossal volcanic eruption. It is a species that builds skyscrapers, sends probes to Mars, and produces mountains of plastic. Humanity. But to understand the present and perhaps avoid a dark future, we need to look back. Not just for centuries or millennia. Let's go back in time billions of years and witness the emergence of life, its unlikely victories, and its brutal losses. Before we go back to the beginning, there is something we need to understand. Mass extinctions are not isolated accidents. They are events that shape everything that exists, even us. Imagine the scenario: a young, boiling Earth enveloped in chemical and volcanic chaos. Toxic clouds obscured the sky, and the oceans, far from being bluish, were true dark soups of chemical compounds. This is where the story of life begins, not with a spectacle, but with small, invisible miracles. In the heat of hydrothermal vents, the first building blocks of life, amino acids, began to assemble. Perhaps by sheer luck, a thin film of fat encapsulated some of them, creating primitive structures called protobionts. These little pioneers didn't know they were making history. They had no idea that they would be the ancestors of everything: trees, birds, whales, and even you. But they had barely emerged before they faced an implacable enemy. Other, more complex and powerful forms of life began to emerge. These early bacteria not only survived, they have prospered to the point of completely changing the planet. What seemed like an evolutionary triumph quickly turned into a disaster for its predecessors. These bacteria altered the chemistry of the oceans so much that the protobionts became extinct. A cruel cycle began. Life, while creating, also destroyed. Why does this matter? Because this is the first time that life has almost erased its own existence. This first mass extinction is hypothetical, but its message resonates today. The very idea that the first living beings could have eliminated their predecessors reflects something we are experiencing now. We have changed the planet so much with our actions that we are repeating the pattern that began billions of years ago. But the difference is stark. While protobionts succumbed to the relentless chemistry of evolution, we have consciousness. And with that awareness comes a choice: be the cause or the cure. If we go back even further in time, we will see that the planet has already undergone extreme transformations. The great oxygenation, the formation of continents, the emergence of multicellular life forms. Each event brought its own extinctions, but also created new possibilities. It's as if the Earth were an eternal board where pieces are constantly knocked over, only for a new game to begin. But now, for the first time, there is something different. The board is not being turned over by nature, but by us. Our forests turn to deserts, our rivers dry up, and the species that once dominated entire landscapes now exist only as memories. The planet, once dominated by dinosaurs and megafauna, is today shaped by us. And with that comes the inevitable question: how long until there's nothing left? In this series, we will revisit the great extinctions in Earth's history and witness how each of them left profound marks on the planet. We'll see how oxygen transformed the heavens, froze the Earth, and then set the stage for the explosion of life. Let's explore the greatest catastrophe of all, when over 90% of species were wiped out, and understand how dinosaurs conquered an empty planet only to be destroyed in the blink of an eye. But more than a journey through time, this is a reflection on the present. Because the stories that shaped the past are still being written, and we are the central characters. If we want to survive, we need to learn from those who have faced catastrophes before us. And there, are you ready to go back in time and face the history of life in its most brutal and fascinating forms? Because the journey has just begun. Imagine a world where the skies were not blue but a cloudy greenish or beige hue, where the horizon was covered by dense, turquoise-green seas, seething with sulfur and iron. The air? Unbreathable. There were no forests, animals, or even the sound of leaves in the wind. It was the Hadean Eon, the Earth in its first chapters. Here, where today we celebrate the complexity of life, there was nothing but chaos. But in the midst of this disorder, something miraculous happened. In the depths of young, warm oceans, an unlikely place gave the first step toward what we call life. Hydrothermal vents. Jets of heat and minerals emanated from the sea floor, creating small chemical paradises. Imagine these structures as the birthplace of the first amino acids, the fundamental pieces to put together the puzzle of life. It was here, in this inhospitable setting, that simple molecules began to organize themselves, not by magic but by pure physics and chemistry. Now close your eyes and imagine this triumphant beginning. Molecules formed membranes that separated the internal world from the external. Small bubbles became compartments where more complex chemical reactions could take place. These were the protobionts, a glimpse of future living cells. But this achievement, which could be the beginning of everything, faced its first major crisis. The first inhabitants of the planet, these primitive bubbles, soon gave way to more efficient forms of life. Bacteria and archaea, prokaryotic beings. They not only survived but thrived to such an extent that they began to change the environment. Their metabolisms flooded the oceans with new chemicals, radically transforming the composition of the water and ultimately eliminating the protobionts. It's curious, isn't it? The first mass extinction in history was caused by life itself. And although this extinction happened billions of years ago, it reflects something incredibly current. The idea that the success of some can mean the destruction of others. Without rivals, bacteria took over. For more than 2 billion years, Earth was his absolute kingdom. They were small, simple, but incredibly powerful. They changed the oceans, the atmosphere, and even the color of the sky. If you could visit that planet, it would feel like you were in another world. There was no fire because oxygen, essential for combustion, was practically non-existent. Without oxygen, bacteria used bizarre chemical processes to survive, many of which released toxic gases like hydrogen sulfide, that rotten egg smell. These microorganisms also created the largest living structures on the planet, stromatolites. Rock domes that emerged from the shallow waters and glowed with vivid colors, a product of the photosynthetic bacteria that formed them. Curiously, these structures still exist today, in places like Shark Bay, Australia, like a glimpse into Earth's deep past. But the bacterial piece didn't last forever. Other bacteria, called cyanobacteria, began to appear, and with them, oxygenic photosynthesis. This changed everything. They began to release oxygen as a byproduct, a gas that was poisonous to the bacteria that dominated the planet. It was the beginning of a chemical conflict that lasted millions of years and that would culminate in the first major event of planetary transformation, the Great Oxygenation. If you think oxygen is always good, think again. For the life that existed at that time, it was a deadly poison. As cyanobacteria proliferated, oxygen saturated the oceans, bonded with iron, and created immense rust formations. The seas turned red, and little by little this lethal gas escaped into the atmosphere, transforming the sky and altering the climate. The result? A completely frozen planet. Yes, the oxygen that allows us to breathe today was responsible for one of the most devastating events in history, the Huronian glaciation. Imagine the Earth transformed into a huge snowball, where even the oceans close to the equator were frozen. It was the first great ice age, and it lasted an impressive 300 million years. But as the story of life has always shown us, even in the darkest moments, life finds a way. Cyanobacteria, with their impressive resilience, managed to survive. They not only endured, they thrived. And the oxygen that almost destroyed everything ended up creating new opportunities. It formed the ozone layer, which protects the Earth from deadly ultraviolet radiation. It also paved the way for more complex life forms, such as eukaryotic cells, those that, billions of years later, would organize themselves into plants, animals, and us. Looking back, it is impossible not to draw a parallel with what we experience today. Just as bacteria changed the chemistry of the planet and faced the consequences of their own actions, we too are altering our world in ways that may be irreversible. But unlike bacteria, we have something they never had: choice. The question is, will we use our knowledge to change course or repeat the mistakes of the past? Will we learn from the lessons of the first extinctions or ignore the warning signs? Because if there's one thing Earth's history teaches us, it's that life will continue. But us? Well, that's another story. If you've come this far, it's because you also feel that there is something powerful in the history of our planet, something that cannot be ignored, and that's why I invite you to join us on this journey. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share with whoever you think needs to hear this story. Because every time we understand the past, we take a step forward in protecting our future. And remember, life always finds a way. But will we find it? That answer depends on all of us. Have you ever thought about what makes oxygen a hero to us, but a villain to the past? Today, it is synonymous with life, but billions of years ago, it was the most lethal gas the planet had ever seen. When cyanobacteria began releasing oxygen in their metabolic processes, they weren't saving the planet. They were turning it into a hostile place for most living beings at the time. What seemed like a breakthrough was, in fact, a chemical cataclysm that redesigned Earth's history. This event, known as Great Oxygenation, marked the first time that oxygen went from an insignificant trace in the atmosphere to an unrelenting force. Not only did he intoxicate what life did exist, but he also did the unthinkable. He changed the color of the oceans. The iron dissolved in the water reacted with oxygen, forming iron oxides that sank to the seabed in gigantic layers of rust, called iron-banded formations. These layers still exist today as chemical fossils from a planet in revolution. But what if I told you that this revolution almost went too far? As the oceans became saturated and oxygen escaped into the atmosphere, the gas destroyed the main thing responsible for keeping the planet warm: methane. With that, the Earth entered the most extreme ice age in history, an event called Snowball Land. The planet became a gigantic white globe, with ice covering even tropical regions. Now imagine this: Earth, so frozen that the oceans were practically impenetrable. How did life survive this? The answer lies in resilience. Small refugia, perhaps near underwater volcanoes or in pockets of liquid water beneath the ice, have allowed cyanobacteria to continue to exist. However, it was not life that melted the planet. It was the Earth itself, with its geological force. Volcanoes released carbon dioxide into the atmosphere for millions of years, building up greenhouse gases until the ice finally gave way. But what happens when the ice melts? For the organisms that survived, the post-glacial world was an entirely new place. The previously cloudy skies turned blue for the first time. a color we associate with calm, but which, at the time, was the harbinger of a new battle. With the atmosphere finally oxygenated, cyanobacteria were free to expand their domain. It was from this transformation that the first eukaryotic cells, precursors of all multicellular organisms. However, the rise of complexity came with a price. The world was more unstable than ever. Severe climate variations continued for billions of years, culminating in the Ediacaran period, a decisive moment in the history of life. During this period, Earth was home to life forms so bizarre that even today, they defy our understanding. Have you ever heard of Dickinsonia? This creature, flat as a carpet, had no head, mouth, or any sensory organ. It simply existed, absorbing nutrients from the sediment. These enigmatic life forms, known as Ediacaran fauna, were unlike anything we know today. They looked like sea flowers, feathers, or even living fractals. And although they thrived for millions of years, their history ended abruptly. They almost completely disappeared before the beginning of the Cambrian period. What happened to these creatures? The answer may lie in something so common to us that we rarely think about it: the first predators. When animals with skeletons began to emerge, like the first cnidarians and arthropods, they brought with them an ecological revolution: predation. For the first time, life was being hunted, and those fragile bodies of Ediacaran fauna were simply no match for this new evolutionary pressure. This inaugurated what we know as Cambrian explosion, an era of unprecedented biological innovation. But why is this important now? Because evolution is never kind. Each new advancement brings with it a cost. Just as cyanobacteria destroyed their predecessors, Cambrian predators wiped out life forms that couldn't compete. And today, once again, we see the impact of rapid changes in the natural balance. But this time, it's not new life forms that are transforming the planet. It's us. The story of the great oxygenation and ancient extinctions is, in essence, a story of forced transformation, a radical change that redefines who survives and who disappears. The question is, who will survive the transformation we are bringing about now? If these stories fascinate you, I invite you to continue this journey with us. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share with those who need to hear these truths about the past and future of our planet. After all, knowing these stories is not just understanding what happened, but reflecting on what we can do differently. Because if life found a way to continue after ages of ice, red oceans, and poisonous skies, we too can find a way, if we start now. The world has a strange way of surviving. He falls, destroys himself, but always gets up. But the price for this is high. And to understand how much life can resist and reinvent itself, we need to go back to the darkest moments in the planet's history. Moments when the world was almost swallowed by its own fragility. Earth, as we know it, was forged by destruction. Mass extinctions are not accidents. They are forced restarts, brutal interruptions in the narrative of life. The first of these great extinctions came at the end of the Ordovician period, about 445 million years ago. At that time, life was essentially aquatic. The seas teemed with trilobites, brachiopods, and primitive reefs. But then, something terrible happened. Land masses began to slowly migrate towards the South Pole. As continents clumped together, they altered global weather patterns. This resulted in severe glaciation that turned the oceans into icy traps. Sea levels fell drastically, destroying the shallow water habitats where most life once existed. When the ice finally melted, the opposite happened. The oceans rose rapidly, flooding the ecosystems that had managed to survive. More than 85% of species have disappeared. Now imagine this: billions of years of evolution swept away in a matter of millennia. That's the scale of the impact of extinctions. And although the waters eventually calmed, the balance of life was never the same. Fast forward about 100 million years, we reach the end of the Devoniano, the era of fish. Marine life had recovered and diversified. This was the period in which the first giant fish began to dominate the seas, such as the fearsome Dunkleosteus, an armored predator that could reach up to 9 meters in length. On Earth, plants had begun to colonize continents, creating the first primeval forests and radically changing the chemical balance of the planet. But this plant-based innovation came with an unexpected price. Plant roots increased rock erosion, carrying nutrients to rivers and eventually the seas. This generated a series of algal explosions, a phenomenon called eutrophication, which choked the oceans by drastically reducing available oxygen. Marine life was crushed. More than 75% of species have disappeared, including almost all jawless fish and many coral reefs. And here's the irony. The pioneers who paved the way for the modern world also devastated it. The success of land plants created a large-scale collapse, a pattern that echoes in our own actions today. But no extinction was as devastating as the one that marked the end of the Permiano, known as the Great Death. It was the largest mass extinction event in the planet's history, and almost all life forms were wiped out. About 96% of marine species and 70% of terrestrial disappeared. Imagine a world where the Earth is cracked and smoking, the seas have rotted, and the sky is covered in toxic clouds. That's exactly what happened. The cause? An immense lava flow in the region that is now Siberia. For millions of years, these volcanoes released carbon dioxide and methane in unimaginable quantities, causing a greenhouse effect so severe that global temperatures rose more than 10 degrees. The oceans became stagnant and anoxic, allowing purple bacteria to release hydrogen sulfide, further poisoning the planet. The result was a total collapse of ecosystems. For millions of years, Earth was a hot, toxic desert, almost unrecognizable. But what is most striking about this event is not its severity, but its consequence. It was after the Great Death that Earth completely reinvented itself. From the void left by this catastrophe emerged the first dinosaurs and ancestors of mammals, like us. The following period, the Triassic, it was an era of recovery and experimentation. Dinosaurs were still small and almost insignificant, while other giant reptiles dominated. But a new extinction was on the horizon. At the end of the Triassic, about 201 million years ago, another series of massive volcanic eruptions released greenhouse gases that transformed the global climate. Dinosaurs, until then only supporting actors, were the biggest beneficiaries. Their respiratory efficiency and heat resistance put them at the top. This is how the dinosaurs began their reign, which would last more than 160 million years, spanning the Jurassic and the Cretaceous. They diversified into gigantic and strange forms, the colossal sauropods, the deadly predators like the Tyrannosaurus rex, and even flying creatures like pterosaurs. But like everything in Earth's history, the reign of the dinosaurs also came to an end. 66 million years ago, Earth was hit by an asteroid more than 10 kilometers in diameter. It collided with the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, releasing energy equivalent to billions of atomic bombs. Dust released into the atmosphere blocked out the sun, triggering a global winter that destroyed ecosystems. Almost 75% of species have disappeared, including all non-avian dinosaurs. But in the chaos, opportunities arose. Small mammals, which had survived hidden in the corners of the dinosaur-dominated world, emerged to become the new protagonists. It was the end of the era of giant reptiles, and the beginning of it was two mammals, the era that would eventually lead to us. What do these extinctions have in common? They were not just events of destruction, but of transformation. With each catastrophe, the Earth changed, adapted, and created something new, but always at an unimaginable cost. Now, we are facing our own crisis. What will come next? If these stories fascinate you and make you reflect, I invite you to continue with us. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share with your friends. because understanding the past is the only way to avoid the mistakes it can teach us. After all, if the Earth managed to survive all these tragedies, so can we. If we act now, life always finds a way. This phrase, repeated so many times, is not an empty cliché. It is a truth etched into the core of Earth's history. After billions of years and countless extinctions, the proof is all around us. Breathing forests, oceans full of life, skies dominated by birds, and at the center of it all, we are. Humans, the species that shape the world like no other. But now that we carry the burden of being the protagonists of the planet, the question arises that we can no longer avoid. Will we also be the villains of the next great extinction? Or will we be able to write a different story? After the impact that wiped out the dinosaurs, Earth seemed unrecognizable. It was an empty world, marked by ecological debris and a sky that still bore the scars of an endless winter. But slowly, life began to be reborn. The small mammals, which had spent millions of years in the shadows, finally came out into the light. Among them, curious lineages emerged, some that today would sound absurd. Giant sloths the size of elephants, rhinos with enormous horns, and even predatory birds so large that they were called birds of terror. But, as in all previous eras, the balance was disrupted. The arrival of Anthropocene, the age of humans, brought changes that eclipsed any natural event of the past. For more than 200,000 years, our species survived as a secondary player, shaped by the instability of the last ice age. But something changed when we learned to plant, domesticate, and build. In just a few generations, we stopped depending on nature to adapt to it and began to control it. We deforest, channelize rivers, create cities, and without realizing it, accelerate the pace of destruction in a way that not even Permian volcanoes or asteroid impacts could compete with. Today, extinction rates are 1,000 times bigger than the natural average. Tropical forests disappear at a rate of 10 football fields per minute. Corals, the pillars of marine life, are degrading, with more than 50% already lost in the last 30 years. What makes this even scarier is that, unlike previous extinctions, there is no guaranteed recovery time for the planet. We are pushing ecosystems to a point of no return. Given all this, it would be easy to succumb to hopelessness. After all, if even the relentless forces of nature destroyed 90% of life in the past, what can we do about the damage we've caused? But there is something that sets us apart from any other species that has ever existed. We are aware, we have a choice, and we have the ability to change. Imagine the impact we could make if we decided to turn the tide. If each of us took small actions like reducing waste, supporting sustainable initiatives, and demanding more responsible environmental policies, we would be sowing the seeds of a better future. The same future that cyanobacteria accidentally prepared billions of years ago when they filled the world with oxygen. Looking at the history of the planet, it is clear that life as a whole will survive. Even if we drive ecosystems to collapse, even if temperatures rise and oceans overflow, microscopic life forms like bacteria and archaea will find a way to resist and rebuild. What is not guaranteed is whether we will be here to see this rebirth. And that's why this story matters. It's not just about dinosaurs, ice ages, or red seas. It's about what these stories can teach us about resilience, adaptation, and the responsibility to protect a world that is in our hands. The choice is ours, and the time to act is now. If you've made it this far, congratulations. You are part of a minority that is willing to learn, reflect, and perhaps act. But this is just the beginning. Every choice we make, from what we consume to how we treat the planet's resources, contributes to the legacy we will leave. And believe me, legacies are powerful. They define how we will be remembered. Therefore, I invite you to be part of this journey. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share with those you know. Let's spread this message, because the more people understand what's at stake, the greater our chance of turning the tide. Thank you very much for following us this far. Soon, we will bring you more fascinating stories about the history of the planet, the wonders of evolution, and the challenges we need to face together. Stay tuned, because the next story could be the most important of all. And in the meantime, remember, life found a way billions of years ago. Now it's our turn to find ours.